Okay, so After Effects is a much more technical program than we've been working with. It's a lot less intuitive. There's a lot more, I don't know, like technical information that we're going to have to parse. So bear with me. But this is for the 2018 version, so everything at the school should look a lot like this. So technically, when you open these up at the school, they're actually going to have a screen that says start new project. Mine does that automatically, I just noticed. So what happens here is before, whether it was InDesign or Photoshop or Illustrator, you could have multiple files open at a time, but they were not interconnected. So you could have multiple PSDs and you put them in the same folder or something, but otherwise they weren't connected at all. Okay, but in a program like this and several others going forward, you have a larger overriding project, and that project can contain multiple different things that you are working on, multiple different, in this case, compositions or timelines or sequences, or it can basically it's like having a lot of PSD files in one giant Photoshop file that's all interconnected. And that's a function, that's a feature, not a bug, but it does make things a little bit more confusing. So you would have to click the Make New Project button. And when it does that, this is not actually saved anywhere yet. If I bring up Windows, there's at the school there's a VFX examples folder that we used, or you could have whatever folder you want. But in there is where you would save the project file. And somewhere in there, whether out here or in its own folder called footage or assets or something, you would have all of this stuff. So just like InDesign, this is a program that links to other things. It does not straight up import them into here. So you need to make sure everything is in the same folder. So one of the things I can do is actually go File, Save As. It's redundant, Save As, because there are other kinds of saving. Get to that in a second, but File, Save As, and then I navigate to that folder that all of my footage is in, and I can say, test project, and that way it'll maintain all of the file relationships, and also it's now saved, which means I can continuously save, and it can maybe have a backup. You never want to leave this as like untitled while you're working. That's just bad form. All right, so now we need stuff. This is not a program, you can't actually create things from whole cloth, but mostly this is about manipulating stuff that already exists. So File, Import, File. Again, kind of redundant, but there's other ways and crazy things you can import. Even if you're doing multiple files, just do File. And I'm going to navigate to the folder, footage, there we go. And you can just shift select or drag select all of the things that are in there. Don't worry about all of these options, because these things we're bringing in, it's not really mattering too much. So, excuse me. Okay. Now, what we have here is a list of assets, and they're in the project panel. So all of these programs going forward are going to have something that looks like a project panel, and it's usually going to be on the left-hand side of your workspace. We're actually in just a general, what workspace are we in? Oh, small screen. There you go. Apparently this is a small screen. But what that does is it collapses these panels over here, depending on what you're working on. Oh, there we go. We'll not use that again. And then you have your layers on the bottom left and a timeline over here. So first we're going to make a thing to work on, and then I'll go over some of these technical details. So if you want what you're working on, your sort of palette, your canvas, to be the same size and same settings as your video that you've brought in, you can actually just click this video and drag it to where it says new composition from footage. And what it will do is it will make your workspace identical to the footage, both in length of time, which is your timeline here, so it's 1 minute 40 something seconds, and also the size, resolution, frame rate, all that stuff. And that's a good thing to do if you're working mostly with one type of footage. You can make your composition like that, and then make changes from there. So when you have something with time in it, I have a time marker here, and this pulling back and forth is called scrubbing. And so I'm scrubbing through the footage just to see it. You can see it's really breaking down when I move. That's because I'm recording my screen and my computer is set to do that on purpose so that I don't crash everything. So that pixelation, that's to make sure everything stays running. Um, Now, when you put something in here, you can see there's a lot. I'm actually going to get rid of parent. I'm going to hide that, and I'm going to bring up a column called modes because that might be something you work with. But there's a lot of settings for one layer because there's just a lot to take in. So there's the eyeball, universal symbol for make this thing show up or not show up. The same thing, but for sound. If something has an audio track to it, ignore this one. And then you can lock a layer, same as before. There's the name of the thing that is the layer. A whole bunch of very technical settings that you're not going to use today. And then we'll get to what mode is first in a little bit. But the way this works is that if I have this, and then let's say I have a JPEG, I'm going to put this on top. So, and I'm going to move it to the side. So if what you have is a picture, or as any layer ends before the edge of the canvas, you'll see the one underneath. Same as in Photoshop. So if you layer two things on top of each other and one does not completely cover the other, you see the other one underneath. And they stack in exactly the same order. So if let me move this down here, right? There we go. So this one shows on top of this one, shows on top of this one. Because that's the order the layers are. If you want that to change, you have to drag one layer above the other, so on and so forth. All right, so move that there. Okay, so the other thing you'll notice is that these bars down here, which are color coded, they're color coded by default. A still is a different color than these movie files. And you'll see that this there we go. This smoke one, it doesn't last as long as the fire. And that's because the video is just literally shorter than the fire video. So if I come over here, it's hard to read, but it says it's about 50 seconds, which is where it ends here. And then this one is the length of the composition. So these edges determine where something starts and stops. You can move them. You can't expand it outward. I can't drag it to the right because I can't make a video longer if it's not longer. But I can trim it. This is called trimming. So if you hover over the edge, your cursor changes to these arrows. Now I have something resembling a sequence of events rather than there we go. So Star Destroyer, and then as I drag through, it goes to this smoke, and then as I drag through, it goes to the fire, right? And you can actually see, if you look closely, the bar kind of continues on, but it's grayed out. So it's letting you know there is more footage in this direction. We're just not getting to it. Just so you know, stills don't have that. They can just go as long or short as you want because it's just a picture. So it can show up as long or short as you want it to. Okay. Now, the other thing that you can do is I'm going to expand these back out so that they're overlapping each other. Are these composite modes. So these are just like composite modes in Photoshop for layers. So if I overlay it, I get this look. If I darken, there we go. Ooh, that's kind of cool. Now, if you take like one of the video classes, it will let you know what these things are doing technically. They're all doing something very specific technically, but for our purposes, know that what it's doing is it's comparing one pixel to the other from between the two layers and then making a decision of what to do. For example, darken looks at the two pixels and takes the darker one, which is why the black background for the space here on the Star Destroyer is always what's there, and then a lot of the lighter parts of the Star Destroyer go away in terms of the fire, except you can see some of the darker details of the Star Destroyer. Lighten does add does the opposite. It takes whatever the brighter one is, which in some cases is still nothing. But a lot of the Star Destroyer is there, except the darker parts, which are actually now red because the red of the flames. And then there's all these other different ones. I recommend clicking through them and just seeing what happens, right? And getting a sense. You can know mathematically what's going to happen. That's not the same thing as seeing what it does. So kind of get to learn what they are just intuitively. So let's see. Now, I mentioned before that there is, if this does not come onto the edge, then we can see below it. But there is another form of dealing with transparency. And I have this header here from class. And if I drag this, I can also drag it over here. And we can see it, right? And there's no background. So when I made this in Illustrator, and this is an Illustrator file, right? I didn't put a white background, I just left the white of the page. And so technically this file has transparency around all of the letters and the graphic things. And I'd said before that everything has to turn into a raster eventually, which it will in here. But this program is so smart, unlike InDesign, it can just read the AI file directly. And if I click this button right next to the little guy, between the little guy and the little line, you'll see that this layer has a button right there that I can press. And what that will do is make this vectorized forever, which is why I could scale it up and it still looks perfect. If I turn that off, it looks like crap. It's all fuzzy. Turn it back on, looks perfect. So this program is smart enough to read a vector file and keep it as a vector if you tell it to. If, by the way, if you're thinking, oh, that still kind of looks fuzzy, it's because I turned this down by half because I'm recording the screen and I don't want it to crash. So there's this is a very sophisticated program. There's a lot it can do. You can bring in stuff that has transparency on it, PNGs, AI files directly. Now, why go directly to the AI file? Well, what if your client's like, I hate the blue, I want it to be green. I want it to be a darker blue, a brighter blue, or whatever. Like you can go, because this is linked, I can open up Illustrator, make changes to this file, and just bam, it updates right in here without me, I'm going to save, without me doing anything. I don't have to re-export and then re-import. It just shows up, which is great. So I'm going to get rid of this because I don't need it anymore. All right. So you saw before that I rescaled this, right? That's one way to do it. There is a bounding box around here that you can kind of rescale. Make sure you're holding down Shift. But there's a lot of other properties to what's going on here. I'm going to move this up a little bit. So one of the properties, sets of properties are called transforms. And if I twirl down, that's what we call when we click these little like caret things. These little triangles are called carets, and if you click on them to twirl it down, you see all the stuff that's in there. If you twirl it up to click, you make it go away. And this is where your transform properties are. So normally when we click on stuff, properties are like over here or over on the top. Not so with After Effects. The properties are actually displayed down here in the layers. These are some tools that you're not going to really use. And these are controls for controlling what happens when we're watching stuff. But these are your properties. And so I can scale, right? I can rotate, although really, like, I'm not sure that you should be. Not with video files and things like that. You'll make it look like a cheap local commercial real quick. Opacity we use a lot, but I'm going to bring this down a little bit. So the problem with using opacity to blend things together is that it doesn't care what the pixels look like compared to each other. It just makes them all dimmer. But if you use it in conjunction with a blend mode, which does compare pixels to each other, overlay, right now you've got something that's blending together a little bit better, especially if I didn't have the scale that back up. If I didn't have that crazy outline, right? So if I have this on normal, it's like, oh, I just made it dimmer. But if I put it to overlay or soft light, look at that. See how it's like kind of really blending into the fog, especially if we were to play the fog? That's so much better as far as effects go, right? It's like really blending into things because it's considering the pixels on both layers. So the only time I would use opacity not with a blend mode is if you're literally just having it appear, like a fade, like you're changing shots. All right. I'm going to put this over here. Let's see. And then position. So I'm going to change the color of this so we can see it maybe. There we go. So the position is measured by this anchor point, and it measures it from the top left-hand corner. So in this case, it's 632.1 pixels this way, so X is always across, and 362 pixels down. That's what we're looking at here. The anchor point is the same thing, except it's across the image. So this anchor point position, it starts here at this image, and it's 960 pixels down and 540 pixels, oh boy, 960 pixels across, 540 pixels down. Now, that's a much higher number of pixels than we have on position, and yet it still looks like it's kind of in the same place. Well, it's scaled to 66%. So you've got two different spaces you're considering when you're looking at this. The anchor point is the thing around which stuff rotates and scales. So if you want that to rotate or scale around a different place, you have to move the anchor point. There's two ways to do that. One is to simply move that anchor point. I just changed the number. Or you can click on a number and scrub through values. The problem with this is that you see how it moves. You would have to adjust this to make the picture look the same again. There is a tool. It is the one that looks like a dotted box. It's called Pan Behind tool. And you'll see as I click this, both numbers change. So the Pan Behind tool allows me to adjust. I wonder if I can hit the edge. Nope. Adjust where the marker is, right? Without changing how this looks. Now, if you want to make any other changes, you got to go back to your regular selection tool. But this will allow me to rotate around that point or scale to that point. So if I turn off constrained proportions for a moment, I can scale it like this. All right, so, and when we get to our homework, there is going to be a reason to know how to do that. All right, so I've been going over all of these different things, but what if we actually just want to watch it, like play through it? So one of the issues we're dealing with, and I really hope this doesn't crash while I'm taping this, we have to actually cache this, which is another way of saying we have to kind of render it into something that's temporary. So if you press this button, playback will start after entire range is cached. What's going to happen is it'll start playing eventually. I'm going to shorten it significantly. But this is my work area, by the way, that I'm changing so that there's less to cache. The problem is that this, you can see this is all I was scrubbing over it and nothing happens, so it was already cached. And you can see every time I drag really slowly, this green bar fills in. That's all cached. But if I press play, you're going to see it play through, and it's not going to be at speed. It's going pretty fast, actually. That's actually faster than the video. There's the video, right? So that's what caching it does. So the first time you play through it, if you have it caching, make sure you're like waiting till it actually plays through before you say, oh my god, it's the wrong speed. Okay, so what that means is that if I ever make a change, if I change the opacity, everything went away. See that? It marks, it knows where the things were overlapping, and so it says all those things that you just cached, gone, because you made a change. I don't know if it's smart enough to... Oh, it is smart enough. Yes. So this is new. I changed it back to where it was, and it's like, oh, we have that. And the green bar showed up again. So, like I said, this is a very, very advanced program. And I keep hitting save on this, and I keep wishing I could save my cached video. But there's a lot of different options for playback. So I'm going to end this video here to make sure it saves, and then I'm going to start a new video to go over some of those very dense video things that I promised you guys.